In our Shepherd's Bookshelf podcast today, we're going to look at an issue of Theonomy. And here's a new book, Theonomy, Old and New, a Reformed Baptist Assessment. This is published by G3, that a lot of the folks with G3 are Reformed Baptists, so this fits well. But this is a hot issue right now. Many of you know Christian Reconstructionism, Dominionism, Theonomy. That was very popular back in the 80s and 90s with various ones. As a dispensationalist myself, I see clear distinctions between the Old Covenant of Law and the Church Age. But how do theologians who are more aligned with Reformed theology see Theonomy? Because Theonomy comes out of Reformed theology, but it takes it further, as we'll see in this book here. So it's good to see that, and as the subtitle says, this is a Reformed Baptist assessment. So it doesn't exactly fit where I am as a dispensationalist. It doesn't exactly fit where many Reformed Paedo-Baptists are, Presbyterians and so forth. So there are some differences, but overall, a lot of agreement as well. The first part of the book is written by Sam Waldron, and his material here is comprised of stuff that he's written going back into the 90s, when old Theonomy, as they call it, the early original stages of Theonomy, was very popular, and a number of leaders wrote extensively on this subject, and it became popular for a time. Rushdoony is probably the godfather of the movement. Then you also have Greg Bonson, an apologist, Gary North, David Chilton, and Gary DeMar, among others. Very, very popular back in the 80s, 90s, and so forth. That particular movement kind of waned and went underground for a long time. Not a whole lot of people were following. Then it was resurrected by the new Theonomists. We'll look at them in just a moment. But this is why the book is written. And the first part of the book, about 2/3 of the book, is about the originators of the Theonomy system. And that's Rushdoony and Bonson and North and these kind of guys here. There are four major tenets of the system. First of all is presuppositional apologetics. Secondly, the doctrine of predestination. Thirdly, is the abiding validity of the law in exhaustive detail. Get back to that in a moment. And postmillennialism. So there's four tenets of old Theonomy. The authors here, who are Reformed Baptist, would agree with the first two. The first one is presuppositional apologetics. The second one is predestination. But they differ on the other two concerning the law and postmillennialism. So we will look at that from the book. But even among theonomists, old and newer versions, there's some substantial differences to how they express what theonomy is. And this is why it's hard to nail it down. It's hard to say here's what is taught. There's some definite distinctions, but there's also some differences between them as well. But mainly the key features here to understanding it is to understand Israel and to understand the theocratic kingdom of which Israel was originated. So here's a sum up by Waldron. He says, does the redemptive history revealed to us in the Bible permit the idea that the law of the theocratic kingdom, and in particular its judicial law, remains abidingly valid in exhaustive detail in the present phase of redemptive history? Does the redemptive history revealed in the Bible allow for the possibility that millennial blessings of the type expected by Theonomy await the church before the return of Christ? When the questions are put this way, it becomes clear that nothing is more important in weighing Theonomy than a penetrating understanding of redemptive history as it is presented and structured in the Bible. So that's Waldron's summation, and he is going to work through that. Now, classical Reformed theology understands the uniqueness of the nation of Israel. And they realize that there are certain institutions and blessings that go with the Mosaic covenant and the Davidic covenants and the idea of Yahweh as their king, and also a lot of issues concerning the land, concerning the Old Testament laws, the temple, the sacrificial system, the Davidic dynasty. And these things, at least the laws, the judicial laws, we'll look at in a moment, are removed in the destruction of the theocracy. When Israel went into captivity, first of all, Assyria and then Babylon, and their nation was gone as a nation, these type of things began to be destroyed in that action. The theocracy, they believe, will be restored not by the gospel presentation, evangelism, or social action of the church, but by Christ when he comes again. And so with that, we would be, at least I would be, in agreement. It's not the church's duty to set up the kingdom on earth, as post-millennialism teaches. It is either through evangelism or social action. Christ will set up his kingdom when he returns. So a big piece of this is that the Gentile nations today are not under the Old Testament judicial or civil system, civil laws. They are, however, under the moral law of God as epitomized in the Ten Commandments. This is the distinction made by most Reformed theologians, that the law is broken up into three different sections: the civil, judicial, and moral. The judicial and civil are no longer in effect for anybody, actually, including Gentiles. But the moral law of God is part and parcel of who God is. It reflects the holiness of God himself, and therefore we're still under the moral law. The author here does accept the already not yet hermeneutic, which means that he believes the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, has been established at the coming of Christ, but not in its totality. It's here in a mystery form. Matthew 13 is used in this book to try to show that, but there's more to come. The fullness of the kingdom will come at the return of Christ. Some problems with that include the fact that the idea is that the church is the new Israel. And I, as a dispensationalist, would reject that. But they are clear, and I appreciate this. The dominion mandate, found all the way back in Genesis chapter 1, is not eradicated, they don't believe, but they do not believe it's on par with the Great Commission. And I would say we're probably not even under the dominion mandate. That's another discussion for another day. But at any rate, it's certainly not. In other words, it's not the task of the church to solve all the issues of society and to build a kingdom on earth. It is the task of the church to proclaim the gospel and point to Christ. The old theonomists, such as Bonson, taught the abiding validity of the law in exhaustive details. That meant that the law and all portions of the law are applicable to the church today and to society. All society should be wrapped around the Mosaic law in all three parts of the Mosaic law. And it also includes the punishments, the capital punishments and so forth that are found in the Old Testament. This is what Bonson would believe. Interesting, Waldron says that view is of theonomy is the hermeneutic of paedobaptism. That is the doctrine that many Reformed theologians accept, but rejected by Reformed Baptists. I'm not sure that the classical Reformed people would agree with that, but that's what he says. Now, the classical Reformed theology teaches then that the judicial civil order was unique to the Old Testament Israel and no longer is binding on the church. God is no longer the unique king of any civil entity today. And that's a major difference from what theonomy is teaching. But we are under the moral law of God. It is still binding, and we're still judged by that moral law. As to eschatology, the theonomists are consistently postmillennial. And here's what he says. He says, postmillennialism is the faith that Christ will, through his people, accomplish and put into force the glorious prophecies of Isaiah and all the scriptures, that he shall overcome all of his enemies through his covenant people, that he will exercise his power and kingdom in all the world and over all men and nations, so that, whether in faith or in defeat, every knee shall bow to him and every tongue shall confess God. In other words, it is the task of the church to put into effect the kingdom principles, the kingdom laws, and to develop a kingdom on earth before Christ returns. The key text, scriptural text, include Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 to 20, and what the meaning of fulfilled. Jesus said, I'd come to fulfill the law, what that means. And also, perhaps Isaiah 65, 12 to 15, that talks about the kingdom age. Now, part 2 is written by Tom Hicks. This is the new Theonomy. This is a newer group that has been resurrected, so to speak, or dusted off and reformulated by people like Doug Wilson, Jeff Durbin, and James White. But they differ too. For example, Wilson accepts the threefold division of the law, but Durbin does not. Wilson says we can't exhaustively apply all the Old Testament laws to today's world, but we apply the principles. But that calls into question the subjectivism of which principles and how it applies. And Wilson has his ideas. Other theonomists have other ideas. Very difficult when it's not spelled out in Scripture. Durbin actually collapses the judicial laws into the moral laws. So he kind of is more of a full law person with the applying the Old Testament laws to today. But all of them are postmillennial dominionists. They have the similar understanding of the kingdom, and they make misapplication of the law to the Gentile nations. The strategy of the new theonomists is this, I'll quote, practically speaking, they believe that they can achieve the goals when the excesses of American liberalism reach unsustainable levels, leading to a cultural collapse and chaos, while theonomic communities based on Old Testament law will thrive. These communities will then expand to overtake the cultural wasteland and one that was once America. As more and more people see the goodness of living under the Old Testament law, especially compared to the disastrous effects of liberalism, they will vote voluntarily to put themselves under the Old Testament judicial law as the ideal form of civil government. So that is the strategy. It's a long-term strategy for people like Wilson. It could take 10,000 years, 20,000 years to get there. But ultimately, the world will turn to the Old Testament law and decide that's how we ought to live. Now, Tom Hicks believes that the moral laws summarized in the Ten Commandments are binding today, but not what he calls the positive laws. Not sure where that word positive came from. Kind of confuses me. Probably somewhere in theology books somewhere that I'm not aware of. But positive laws are the particular laws that apply to a particular time and for a particular reason. They're not universal and they're not applicable to all times. Positive laws would include the ceremonial law of the Old Testament and the judicial laws of the Old Testament that was given to Israel as a nation, and they were temporary and could not be applied to the world today. The Bible teaches then a distinction, according to Hicks, between the moral and the positive laws, but to the theonomists, they either believe that these laws can be applied completely, exhaustively, as Bonson believes, in all their details, or in principle, as Wilson believes as well. Well, this book, Theonomy, Old and New, I think it's a helpful critique. As I said, it's from my Reformed Baptist position, and so some Reformed people would not agree with certain things, and the dispensationalists would not agree with certain things. But overall, it's very helpful. It's insightful. We see what is being said by the principal leaders of this movement, both in the past and in the present, and gives some good insights and highlights to what's going on. This is a big, big subject, and so we can't expect one small book that's just about 200 and some pages to be able to explain it all, but it does help. So if you'd like to get some insight from this direction, I would recommend Theonomy, Old and New.